Welcome to the second lesson in the course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where we delve into the Jewish and Israeli claims to Palestine. I want to clarify here that when I use the term Palestine, I am referring to it as a geographical designation rather than a nationalist one. This distinction is essential for our discussion, as it allows us to focus on the historical and cultural context of the region, without attaching modern political or national implications. Our exploration will cover the historical roots, religious connections, and ideological bases that have shaped Jewish and Israeli perspectives on this land over time. The Middle East is a region marked by profound complexity, characterized by a rich tapestry of diverse cultures, religions, and long-standing conflicts. Within this intricate landscape, the conflict between Jewish and Arab populations stands out as particularly significant. The historical presence of Jews in the region dates back to the 2nd millennium BCE, while the Arab presence is traced to the 7th century CE. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 set the stage for ongoing tensions and hostilities with its neighboring states. The Jewish people, or Israelis, have a deep-rooted historical connection to the land of Palestine, which has been a central element in their cultural and religious identity since the mid-2nd millennium BCE. The earliest known mention of Israel appears on an Egyptian stela, attributed to Pharaoh Merneptah from the 13th century BCE. This inscription, celebrating Merneptah's military campaigns in ancient Canaan, includes a reference to a group called Israel. The passage states, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more." While this inscription confirms the existence of a people or entity named Israel during this period, it offers few additional details. The name Israel itself has its origins in the Hebrew Bible. According to the Book of Genesis in the Old Testament, the patriarch Jacob is given the name Israel, which translates to he who struggles with God. This name is conferred upon Jacob after a nocturnal encounter with a divine being, where he wrestles with an angel and demonstrates perseverance in seeking God's blessing. Jacob's new name symbolizes his resilience, and his 12 sons would go on to become the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel. The unified kingdom of Israel, established under the rule of Saul, David, and Solomon, eventually split into two distinct entities, the Kingdom of Israel in the north and the Kingdom of Judah in the south. Following their conquest by the Babylonians, the Jewish people were exiled but returned to their homeland under the decree of Cyrus the Great, the Persian king. Over the subsequent centuries, Jewish communities in the region came under successive Greek, Macedonian, and Roman rule. The Romans annexed the land into the province of Judea, but Jewish resistance was fierce. Two major revolts against Roman authority, in 70 CE and again in 135 CE, were met with severe reprisals. The destruction of Jerusalem and the scattering of its Jewish inhabitants became a turning point. After the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed the province Syria Palestina in a deliberate attempt to diminish Jewish ties to the land and erase their national identity. In the aftermath, many Jews were driven into exile, dispersing throughout other parts of the Roman Empire. This dispersion marked the start of the Jewish diaspora, profoundly influencing Jewish history and identity for centuries to follow. Antisemitism has been a persistent feature of European history for over 2,000 years, existing almost as long as Jews have lived on the continent. While there were periods during which Jewish communities received protection from local rulers, such protections were often motivated by economic and political considerations and were subject to significant variation depending on the time and place. To survive in this challenging environment, many Jews became skilled in specific professions, such as trade, agriculture, craftsmanship, or money lending. In medieval Europe, kings and princes occasionally issued privileges and letters of protection that conferred certain rights and security to Jewish communities. These privileges might include the right to own property, engage in specific occupations, or receive protection against arbitrary persecution. In some regions, Jews were tolerated primarily because rulers sought to benefit from their expertise in finance, craftsmanship, or medicine. However, such protection was often fragile and heavily dependent on shifting political and economic circumstances. Hostility and discrimination against Jews, based on their religious affiliation or ethnic identity, have a long and complex history in Europe. Before the 20th century, antisemitism was frequently rooted in a combination of religious, cultural, and economic factors. During the Middle Ages, Jews were often stigmatized due to the widespread Christian belief that they were collectively responsible for the death of Jesus Christ. This accusation, known as deicide, led to widespread persecution of Jewish communities across Europe. Jews were frequently depicted as Christ killers, a label that fueled hostility and justified violence and discrimination against them. In many cases, Jews found themselves involved in money lending and financial activities, as the Christian Church prohibited its followers from charging interest on loans, a practice known as usury. Jewish communities, therefore, became central to medieval Europe's financial systems. This economic role often bred resentment, as Jews were perceived as greedy or accused of causing societal financial problems. As a result, Jews were often segregated into specific neighborhoods, later known as ghettos, where they were forced to live separately from the Christian population. As a small anecdote about the word ghetto, I can share that its origin is highly debated. One theory suggests it comes from the Italian word ghetto, meaning foundry, referring to the area in Venice where Jews were first confined. Another theory argues that it derives from the Hebrew word get, meaning divorce document, representing the forced separation of Jews from the wider society. The term was first used in 1516 to describe the Jewish quarter in Venice, where Jews were compelled to live in a walled area with restricted movement and a curfew. This Venetian ghetto soon became a model replicated in other European cities. The economic activities of Jewish communities, particularly in trade and money lending, placed them in a precarious position within Christian-dominated societies. While some rulers and city-states valued Jewish financial acumen, this same role made them targets of popular resentment and scapegoating, especially during periods of economic hardship or social unrest. Jewish moneylenders were often depicted as exploitative, and their financial success sometimes provoked envy and suspicion among their Christian neighbors. Consequently, Jews were subjected to economic restrictions, legal discrimination, and forced segregation. The ghettoization of Jewish communities was a manifestation of both fear and necessity from the perspective of medieval Christian authorities. It allowed rulers to maintain control over Jewish populations while simultaneously extracting economic benefits from them. However, the isolation and confinement imposed by ghettos often reinforced negative stereotypes and perpetuated a cycle of exclusion and persecution. Antisemitism in Europe was not only socially pervasive, but also institutionalized in various forms. Legal codes, church doctrines, and public policies often reinforced negative perceptions of Jews, portraying them as outsiders or even enemies within Christian society. The frequent accusations of ritual murder, host desecration, and other anti-Jewish libels led to waves of violence and expulsions throughout the medieval period. During times of crisis, such as the Black Death in the 14th century, Jews were frequently scapegoated and accused of causing the calamity, leading to massacres and pogroms. Despite moments of relative tolerance and protection, Jewish communities in medieval and early modern Europe lived under the constant threat of expulsion, violence, and forced conversion. Their experiences reveal the complex interplay between economic utility, religious intolerance, and political expediency that shaped the long history of anti-Semitism in Europe. This multifaceted hostility laid the groundwork for the systemic persecution of Jews that continued well into the modern era, culminating in the devastating events of the 20th century. One of the most persistent and pernicious prejudices that emerged in European history was the blood libel, a baseless accusation that Jews murdered Christian children to use their blood in religious rituals. This myth led to widespread persecution and violence against Jewish communities across Europe. The blood libel is a false and defamatory allegation accusing Jews of ritual murder, specifically of Christian children, to use their blood for religious purposes, such as baking unleavened bread or matzah during Passover. These accusations served as a potent tool of propaganda against Jews, often inciting mobs and legitimizing brutal repression. One of the earliest and most notorious cases of the blood libel occurred in Norwich, England, in 1144. Local Jews were accused of murdering a boy named William, whose death was attributed to a supposed Jewish ritual. This accusation led to a wave of anti-Jewish sentiment and violence, culminating in the persecution and execution of members of Norwich's Jewish community. The case of William of Norwich became a template for subsequent accusations, reinforcing the myth of Jewish ritual murder. The myth of the blood libel was visually perpetuated through religious art and church propaganda. For example, a panel from the altar at Holy Trinity Church in Loudon, Norfolk, depicts the alleged martyrdom of William, who was supposedly abducted and crucified by Jews in Norwich. Such depictions not only spread the narrative of Jewish culpability, but also served to further demonize Jews in the eyes of the Christian populace. Another significant case involved the boy Simon of Trent in 1475, in the city of Trento, Italy. Simon was reported to have been murdered by Jewish residents during Passover, and his death was quickly framed as a ritual murder. The accusations led to the arrest and torture of several Jews, many of whom were subsequently executed. Simon was later canonized as a martyr by the Catholic Church in 1588, reinforcing the narrative of Jewish guilt and martyrdom. The blood libel myth had far-reaching consequences for Jewish communities throughout medieval and Renaissance Europe. Accusations often led to violence, expulsions, and executions. For instance, Jews were expelled from England in 1290, from Spain in 1492, and from Portugal in 1497. These expulsions were frequently justified by portraying Jews as a dangerous, malevolent presence within Christian society, using the blood libel as evidence of their supposed depravity. The blood libel was not merely a reflection of medieval superstition, but also served specific political and social functions. It provided local authorities and religious leaders with a convenient scapegoat for social tensions, economic hardships, or political strife. By accusing Jews of heinous crimes, these leaders could divert attention away from internal problems, unify disparate Christian communities against a common enemy, and justify the seizure of Jewish property and wealth. Moreover, the blood libel acted as a tool of social control, reinforcing religious orthodoxy and social cohesion by framing Jews as a perpetual other within Christian society. The persistence of this myth reflects the broader dynamics of medieval Christian Europe, where anti-Jewish sentiment was intertwined with religious doctrine, political expediency, and economic advantage. The legacy of the blood libel myth did not vanish with the end of the medieval period. It continued to resurface in various forms in later centuries, influencing modern anti-Semitic ideologies and contributing to the systemic persecution of Jews. Despite its irrational and baseless nature, the blood libel myth demonstrates the powerful role of propaganda in shaping collective fears and prejudices, with devastating consequences for those targeted by such accusations. Understanding the blood libel and its historical context reveals the deep-seated roots of anti-Semitism in European history, illustrating how myths and prejudices can be constructed, propagated, and used as instruments of persecution. The legacy of these libels has continued to cast a long shadow over Jewish-Christian relations, reflecting the enduring power of misinformation and prejudice in shaping human societies. In the late 19th century, widespread persecution of Jews erupted across Tsarist Russia, a series of violent attacks known as pogroms, a term derived from the Russian word for destruction or devastation. These pogroms were often state-sponsored or condoned, and were directed primarily against the Jewish communities in the Russian Empire. Jews were frequently scapegoated for a range of social, economic, and political problems, including economic hardship, political unrest, and religious conflicts. Pogroms in Russia were particularly severe and recurrent from the late 19th century to the early 20th century. Significant outbreaks occurred between 1881 and 1882, coinciding with the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, which was falsely attributed to Jewish conspirators. The violence against Jews reached a horrifying peak during the infamous Kishinev pogrom of 1903, in what is now Moldova. In Kishinev, mobs attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues, resulting in the death of 49 Jews, injuries to hundreds, and the destruction of over 1,500 properties. These pogroms were often characterized by extreme violence, including rape, murder, and the looting of Jewish property. While many of these attacks appeared to be spontaneous outbursts of mob violence, there is substantial evidence that they were tacitly supported or even orchestrated by local authorities and the Tsarist regime. Government officials often turned a blind eye or actively incited violence as a means to distract the populace from broader social and economic issues, or to reinforce the status quo by uniting non-Jewish Russians against a common, demonized other. The pogroms had a profound impact on Jewish life in Russia, contributing to a massive wave of emigration. Between 1881 and the outbreak of World War I in 1914, an estimated 2.5 million Jews fled the Russian Empire, seeking refuge and better opportunities abroad. The majority emigrated to the United States, where they hoped to escape persecution and find new economic opportunities. Other significant destinations included Britain, particularly in cities like London and Manchester, as well as parts of South America, Canada, and Palestine. This emigration wave not only shaped the demographic and cultural landscape of the receiving countries, but also led to the formation of vibrant Jewish diasporic communities that maintained cultural, religious, and political ties to their homeland. Jewish immigrants carried with them their language, traditions, and social networks, contributing to the cultural diversity and economic development of their new countries. In our next lesson, we will delve deeper into the concept of Zionism. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals of equality and universal rights, many believed that Jewish integration could lead to social acceptance and citizenship in European countries. However, growing antisemitism, fueled by nationalism and pseudoscientific racism, dashed these hopes. This wave of exclusion prompted varied responses within Jewish communities. Some intellectuals continued advocating for integration, while others turned towards socialism, Marxism, Zionism, or emigration, especially from Eastern Europe, where restrictive policies further isolated Jewish communities. During this period, the Jewish Enlightenment movement, known as the Haskalah, emerged with the aim of harmonizing Jewish tradition with modern secular ideals. While it encouraged reforms in education and social life, it also encountered opposition from conservative Jewish leaders who feared that secular integration would weaken Jewish identity and faith. If you're interested in exploring this complex period further, don't forget to subscribe to the Academy of History and Culture. See you next time.